Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Chelsea Green Publishing's In Conversation series. Tonight, we are lucky to have Sandor Katz, the author of Wild Fermentation, The Art of Fermentation, and the upcoming book, Fermentation as Metaphor, which is now available for pre-order. He is joined by chefs and co-authors of the newly released Koji Alchemy, Rich Shih, and Jeremy Umansky. The conversation will run for about 30 to 40 minutes and can include question and answers during it and afterwards. If you could submit your questions via the Q&A box, Sandor, Jeremy, Rich, and I will do our best to answer them. Thank you for being here, guys.
Thank you for having us. It's really exciting to be here.
Yeah, totally. It's wonderful to be with you guys. It's been so fun, even though I've been trapped mostly at home since your book came out. Just seeing all the interest in it, it's been really thrilling. And of course, I was just showing them. I guess I'll show everybody that I have been experimenting with vegetable charcuterie. So this is a yellow beet and a red beet. Grew koji on it. Salted it and dehydrated it, and just incredibly delicious, wonderful a texture unlike anything. That's just like a innovative application of koji that I learned from their book, and I have to assume that hundreds of people in kitchens everywhere who already were interested in koji have been, liberated to experiment more, more broadly with koji.
Well, yeah, I think one of the most exciting things about it is just seeing people grow it on just about anything, and just seeing the reaction and people being more adventurous and sort of, I guess this sort of controlled fearlessness in terms of trying it. It's been pretty crazy.
Yeah. That fearlessness too. I think we all got a few props tonight. I got it all from. If you don't have a copy of this book, get it. And
which just for anyone who's confused, now looks like this. Yeah, he's old school. That's the 2003 till 2016 version, and then this is the revised edition.
And, I remember getting this book and, oh yeah, look at this. Milkweed and nasturtium caper, just like blowing my mind. Just like milkweed, you could eat that. Things like you had recipes for chicha in here and labna and just like all sorts of wonderful things. And I'm almost positive, isn't there, I know there's tempeh. A little section there. I'm pretty sure, yeah, you've got miso in here too.
I have miso, but at the time that I published that book, I was intimidated about making koji. And it was really, I made miso every year from 1993, but it probably was about 2005 before I got up the gumption to make tempeh to make koji. And I'd been making tempeh for years, but, in this communal kitchen situation, I was using the oven as my incubator, and 24 hours just seemed like the most that I could commandeer it. So the idea of maintaining a warm temperature, 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 28 to 32 Celsius for 48 hours just seemed intimidating. And I think that that's really the, that's the big hurdle for people with making koji, is just figuring that out. But once you figure it out, it's so straightforward, whether it's a space heater or an incandescent light bulb or a heating pad. There's so many easy, technical ways of doing it, but, you just have to figure it out.
Yeah, I love, some of the most low tech. So at my restaurant at Larder, above our hotline kitchen, there's a loft where we have I have my desk and a computer there, but it's above the exhaust hood. So I have a fan running up there year round because it's like 85, 90 degrees up there all the time. So yesterday,
Well, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yesterday, I cooked off some black beans in the morning, and I sprinkled some aspergillus soya on them, like one of the Kojis used specifically for beans. And, 6:30 when I'm leaving tonight, it was fully grown, beautifully caked together. It was literally just sitting on my desk in just plastic wrap trays. So it's like, that environment, it exists. Like, people that have a house, they may have like a, finished attic like I have here. It's hot up there right now. It's perfect. So you don't even need that light bulb or, the oven. Like, you can really go super low tech. I mean, almost no tech, and be able to do it. That's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally had this experience once when we all have rice cookers in some way or fashion, and I had forgotten that I had shut it off, and I hadn't even inoculated the rice. And once I noticed that it was off, I was thinking that the rice would have spoiled or gone bad, but I actually opened it and it smelled sweet. And it was sticky, and I tasted it, and it tasted like koji. So basically, at this point, my house already has spores that are all over the place that will inoculate things.
Well, I mean, of course, until the 20th century, nobody ever had starter cultures, and so generally, it was in the environments where people had repeatedly had success of making it. It would just occur.
Yeah.
Well, and Sandor, I'm sure you've seen some of that in your travels throughout Asia.
Oh, yeah.
In parts of China or the Koreas, where they work with a much wider set of molds than typically the Japanese do. The Japanese are very rigid and purified. But, in the Koreas and parts of China, they're not using cultures per se, but they're taking some like dried rice husks or rice straw, and they're letting that be part of it, and the molds are already on there. So they're not using these purified powdered starters. One thing Rich and I like to kind of talk about and get people to know, though, is if you're in that part of the world,
hey, Millie,
that's a great thing, because that organism is from that part of the world. If you live in North America or South America or parts of Africa or Europe, just be mindful, because it's not going to be as easy to cultivate that organism or intended organisms, because you're in a different geographic location. You have different organisms and microbes. So be mindful of those sorts of things. Experiment to your heart's content, but just be ready to potentially accept some severe consequences.
Well, I mean, actually, I visited in Costa Rica. I visited an indigenous community on the Caribbean coast, Bree people, who have a tradition of making chicha, a corn-based alcoholic beverage, where they grow a fungus on a cake of corn, like, exactly analogous to, what I've seen in Asia, people sort of, growing fungus on cakes of rice or amaranth or millet in order to make beverages. So, I mean, certainly all around Asia, they're doing that, but, that was at least one example. And I just recently came across an anthropologist writing about some other examples in the Americas of people using molds in indigenous practices.
That's fantastic.
So primarily aspergillus molds, although I'm not sure how much microbiology has been done about them.
Let's hope it's done. I mean, that could be just fantastic to see. And I'd also be interested in the evolution. Like, was there somehow influence from one or the other, or did they evolve parallel to each other just because this is what safe species of aspergillus do once they contact our food, and we really enjoy what they do.
Yeah,
For sure.
That's incredibly fascinating.
Yeah. No, I thought so too. So one of the things that I really, I mean, I really appreciate about what you two are doing is like, taking these ancient ideas and then just like applying them in new ways. And I just wanted to show off like one other thing that I've been working with lately, which is I've been making table condiments out of natto. So like what I saw in China, natto, soybeans fermented, which I recognize from smell and texture as natto, but then they were like mashed with spices and dehydrated and made into little spice cakes that were used as seasonings. And then I got the idea, really it was like brainstorming with Mara King, who's a friend of mine and a wonderful fermenter, when she was visiting. But we mixed, we dehydrated natto, mixed dried natto with toasted sesame seeds, gochugaru, the Korean chili flakes, Szechuan peppercorns, and salt. And I mean, I can't get enough of this seasoning. It is just so good. And a number of my friends who have been over, who've been put off by natto, love this. So, it's like, it's taking like the flavor of natto, but like losing the sliminess of it by dehydrating it and then mixing it with other spices. So it's more of like a layered flavor rather than just like, all natto.
And that's, the Shakis, Christopher and Kristen, they've got a great natto like brownie recipe, chocolate recipe. That's their whole track, right? So it's like kind of trick your body into starting to crave the nutrients and the microbe set, and then work in like something that you maybe can't palate. So kind of disguising it. But it's really interesting, how you've been doing that. I want to say 2015, a restaurant I was working at the time, I was running, one of my servers, his family's from Japan. He grew up in Denver. His father emigrated and had a sushi restaurant in Denver. And this is around the time I was really heavily starting to work with Koji, and I was getting ready for my TED Talk. And Kai says to me, he says, my grandmother is like a Koji grower in Japan and is on like Japanese television all the time. She, like a public access cooking show in the city she was in. And he had her send this Koji seasoning, and it was 3 different vials. They were dried powdered Koji. One was 100% Koji. The other was Koji and 25% salt. And the third was Koji and 50% salt. And they were just meant to be like table-side seasonings, where you would get like the great complexity of flavors that Koji had, plus salt. And he explained to me, like, this is very common in Japan, especially in places with some of the elderly population where they may be watching their sodium intake. They use seasonings like this because it has half the amount of sodium as just using regular salt. Plus, it has all the benefits of, the dried enzymes and the flavor of Koji and everything. So, all that works fantastically. And it's great to see it just across so many cultures, from China to your farm in Tennessee to, Japan and so on and so forth.
Well, and of course, Nurture New York is making a natto and Koji mix.
Yeah,
so they're joining them together, fermenting them a little bit, and then selling them like that.
I have some in my fridge. It's fantastic. I actually have to send her some pastrami essence. But yeah, it's so cool just seeing. I think one of the fascinating things is seeing all these microbial sets start to be viewed through different cultural lenses across geographic locations. We're honestly starting to see foods that the world has never seen before. And it's a really, really exciting time to be fermenting, to be growing koji, and to be making the foods that are made from it. It's really just so fascinating to see so much of what so many other people are doing. And I think Rich can go on about that forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the coolest things about what I discovered about working with koji is it's just that little bit of, breakdown that creates, the umami that really brings the product to life. I mean, you need such a small amount of protein to create a big difference. And I think we often talk about when you look at it in context of how much soy sauce do you add to, say, a marinade or a little bit to a soup or, a sauce, it's a minuscule amount. And if you think about how much the proliferation of the usage of tomatoes or mushrooms, and the fact that they don't have a huge amount of umami, and the amount that you actually use and make something delicious is such a slight amount to make that really change and sort of make it craveable, make it something that really makes you think about, oh, this is going from something that's just very plain to something that's just like, wow, I don't even understand. And I think that's the key behind, growing koji on different on substrates that you eat as charcuterie in that fashion, is that you don't need a lot to make it really mind-blowing and cause these levels of acceleration and deliciousness and microbial breakdown such that it just changes the game. And I think, when I first started playing with koji and doing, and making things, I always wanted to see how much umami I could make out of a product and maximize it.
Rich, can you use like the example of like your ricotta cheese as an example there?
Sure. I mean, so one of the things ahead of talking about that is just, I used to see people who didn't necessarily understand everything about koji, just add koji to everything. And I was like, I don't understand why they're doing that, because you're not maximizing the proteins to the enzymes to create amino acids to make it delicious. But then after a little bit, when I started thinking about how little of this, umami blasted product that I added to make it delicious, then it really clicked for me. And all of these things that we do that don't necessarily have a lot of protein, and that's what the game changer is. And what Jeremy's referring to is when I first started playing with koji and understanding basically making sort of, umami paste or to be able to create a lot of umami, is I tried to think about, what was loaded with protein other than, the standard of using soybeans or, any sort of legume. And I just started looking through nutritional facts on foods, and I just happened upon, ricotta, and basically it has a ton of protein in it. And I said, well, why don't I just put them together and see what happens? And then I just made this, I call it a ricotta miso. And then what was amazing about it is that it created, these complex aged cheese flavors within the course of a couple months. And if you think about it in the context of, aging cheeses naturally with the microbial behavior that happens externally that gets infused, the level of enzymes is much lower than what is loaded when you grow koji. And it makes total sense that once you have, this enzyme-packed substrate and you start adding it to things, it's just gonna, go wild. And I think that's the one thing that really clicked for me, is that I can add these enzymes to anything to create, sugars from any starch or, amino acids from any protein. And that's when I started to just use these as building blocks and ideas, and just started trying different things and for these enzymes and all this microbial behavior to have all these interactions to create completely different flavors than the origin substrate was totally mind-blowing to me.
So, Sandor, I kind of want to loop in, and I think one of the questions that we get a lot, and we really try to address as predominantly as we could in Koji Alchemy, and you, were our huge inspiration with that, and wild fermentation and the art of fermentation, is like this fearless aspect. Like, how do I do this? How do I start fermenting or growing mold and not kill my whole family? Like, how do I know if something's wrong? And I remember early on, like, learning from you, like, if it looks good, smells good, and tastes good, chances are you're in the clear. So what are, like, some of the, I don't know, mental exercises or, you know, beginning ferments or, you know, things to grow?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you know, I mean, to my mind, you know, growing koji is not a beginning. It's not like a first fermentation project. I mean, you know, I try to like not overly mystify it. You know, it's not that it's that hard. It's just that, you know, you have to figure out a way to, you know, control the temperature, and to some degree the humidity. And so, you know, like that's more challenging. Like, you know, if you want to pickle some vegetables, all you need is a jar and a cutting board and some salt. Like you know, you don't really need to control the temperature in any way. I mean, sure, if it's hotter, it's going to go faster, and it can't possibly preserve as long. If it's cooler, it'll be a slower process, and you could enjoy it for months and months. So, you know, so there's a little bit, but like whatever the temperature is, you can ferment vegetables. All you need is like some vegetables and some salt and a knife and a jar, and you know, and it's super easy. And you know, and there's no danger to this. There's zero danger. You know, as you all have pointed out in your book, you know, there are strains of Aspergillus that, you know, that can be quite toxic for people. And, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be straightforward for, you know, a novice to be able to tell the difference between the strain they want and the strain they don't want. So you want to use starter cultures for that. And but, you know, if you're using the starter cultures, I mean, I don't think that there's any particular danger. You know, I mean, at this point, I've seen thousands of people grow koji and grow tempeh without any problems. So I don't mean to make it, you know, intimidating for anybody, but you have to obtain the culture, and you have to like figure out an environment where you can, you know, maintain the, you know, the rough range of temperature and humidity that you need. So it's more technically demanding. But, you know, for people in our time with like the benefit of, you know, having all of this information easily available on the internet, you know, none of this is rocket science. You know, koji and tempeh and sauerkraut and all of these things, you know, people figured this out thousands of years, and they didn't have microscopes and they didn't have thermometers. You know, and you know, and the fact that we do have microscopes and we do have thermometers, and we can through the internet just like order the cultures to make these things happen, you know, makes them very, very much within our reach. And then especially now that there's this like literature that is developing that has, you know, all of these very, you know, nuanced ideas. So, you know, you guys figured out what you figured out just by playing around in your kitchen and trying things. And I'm sure there were failed experiments along with all the successful experiments. Yeah. And so you've been able to provide more guidance, but like none of this is that is that hard. You know, I mean, my friend Fred Bright at the USDA, you know, I mean, he writes all the textbooks about fermenting vegetables, and, you know, there just is not case history of illness and food poisoning, you know, because we've all been raised to be so afraid of bacteria. It's easy for someone to take like, you know, all of the, you know, fear they've ever been taught to have about worrying about bacteria and project it onto, you know, this jar of pickles, and like, oh my God, like, what if I get the wrong bad bacteria growing in here? Oh my God, I might get sick, or I might accidentally kill my children. You're not going to kill your children. You're not going to get sick. You know, the worst that'll happen is your pickles will be soft and you won't like the texture, and you'll want to throw them into your compost. But it's really, it's all very, very safe.
Which is great about it. And I think kind of leads to like the second part of that, because you brought up like information sourcing in the modern age and that sort of thing. And you know, quality of information is important. You know, where you're getting it from. You know,
You always find people who will disagree.
Oh yeah, and you know, you brought up, you know, having a friend at the USDA, and you know, I can't tell you how many times I've deferred to them for, you know, time and temperature tables for canning stuff, or, you know, pH charts. You know, Rich and I, you know, some of the charts that we put into Koji Alchemy, like we researched some of that stuff really heavily and looked at some of those papers. But I think another thing to look at too is like quality of ingredients. I mean, when it comes down to it, just like any other food, the better the quality of the ingredients, the better the end result is. And that's something a lot of people overlook. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a price thing per se. You know, you can grow in your garden. I mean, Sandor, how many vegetables do you grow on the farm there?
I have a beautiful garden. My tomatoes have just petered out, but you know, I mean, actually, I just harvested today. I was thinning daikon radishes, so like the first 2 purple daikon radishes came out of my garden. Very, very exciting moment.
And I'm sure the quality on those, for you and the time and place that you're in, that's world-class quality produce right there. You know, and you compare that to the singular farm that a Michelin chef is somewhere in Italy recommends only getting their stuff from because it's the best in the world. Well, it's the best in the world for them. You know, so if you're someone that can grow your own produce or make friends with the local farmer at the farmer's market, you know, if you're in a rice growing region, those of you in the US that live in the Carolinas, you know, and find some of the heritage rice growers that are down there, you know, in other parts of the world, like always get the best quality ingredients that you can for these makes. You know, and it doesn't always have to boil down to the best quality is the most expensive, you know, because there's other ways to obtain them outside of, you know, just straightforward monetary exchanges. But that's so important.
That just reminds me of something that, like, another thing that I just started harvesting today are chestnuts. And outside my house, there are 3 chestnut trees, and today the first ones fell. But chestnut koji is one of the most delicious kojis that I've made. And, you know, last year I made a half a gallon of chestnut shio koji. And, oh, that was a sad day when we used the last of that. And, you know, oh, what a wonderful marinade that was, the chestnut shio koji.
Oh man, yeah, there's this great really old cemetery from me that has some really old American chestnut trees, and the caretaker lets me go pick them up off the ground, and they're great. So there'll be definitely some chestnut koji coming up really soon here.
Nice. It looks like there's a lot of questions, so why don't I just read through a few, okay? I'm interested in growing koji on lower carb, non-grain foods. I just did my first batch using sunflower seeds and also pumpkin, not yet at 48 hours. It is working. I'm wondering if anyone knows of what non-grains, lower carb foods, maybe nuts, might be a good match for koji and how to best prepare before inoculating.
And you just talked about chestnuts.
Yeah, I mean, chestnuts are wonderful, but, you know, I would say that, like, you know, I'm going to just guess that what all 3 of us would say is experiment. You know, like what do you have that's like fresh and abundant, and just experiment with it. But, like, you know, I think that these 2 guys have really, like, demonstrated for me that, like, you can grow koji on virtually anything. And so, you know, if you're trying to avoid grains, then that's just removing, you know, sort of, you know, one realm of foods. But then any kind of seed, any kind of bean, I mean, maybe you want to try some, you know, vegetable charcuterie and you know, grow it directly on vegetables.
And you know, I'm getting ready. We're going to be getting our sweet potato harvest in, pardon me, fairly soon from some of our local Amish farmers here. And last year I made about 10 gallons of sweet potato black koji. I used the awamori for that, and we made a black koji vinegar in a Okinawan style, and that's incredible. It ferments up so beautifully. The koji itself isn't so delicious, because the potatoes get this weird, nasty, like seed potato texture. But once you ferment them out into some booze and then some vinegar, it's just incredible, absolutely incredible. And I know, Rich, have you found something that it doesn't grow on?
So there's this one time, early on when I was learning about koji, I believe I read something about David Chang saying that it smelled like Fruity Pebbles. So I tried growing koji on Fruity Pebbles, and that didn't work at all. It just got too wet and mushy. I think I could probably play around with the formulation such that I could make it happen, but at that point in time, it just got too wet and mushy. And I think that's one of the things with, some of these other things that people want to work with. If you think about how soybeans are metered with dochi, as well as making shoyu or soy sauce, by being able to, get some toasted flour or some toasted cracked wheat to meter the moisture, such that you don't have such an issue with that sort of spoilage that happens, or off of other microbes taking over. I think with Jeremy's example of doing sweet potatoes, you could get some sweet potato flour and help to enhance and kind of kickstart the growth. And that's similar to the experiments that we do, or the techniques for the vegetable charcuterie, is that you can add a little bit of flour to help kind of kickstart, especially if your environment isn't as sort of tied in, and you're starting to try to get comfortable. You can do these sort of techniques that are basically borrowed from techniques that are that have been staples for thousands of years, that you can just see that, oh, they use a little bit of flour here to kickstart it. So why don't we transfer that information or understanding to something that's wet and mushy that wouldn't quite take it on? And then you can create this environment that's sort of ideal.
But I think that, what you're saying, like regulating the moisture, is so key to success. And, if recently I made some koji out of nixtamalized corn. And, I was cooling it off, trying to dry it off, and it just didn't seem dry enough. So I just took some grits, and I toasted the grits and then sprinkled the toasted grits on it. And that just absorbed the excess moisture. And then sometimes you have the opposite problem, where a substrate just seems too dry, and then just a little spritzer bottle, so you can spray or mist a little bit of water. So it can go either way, where you need to dry out a substrate, or that you need to just keep on adding a little bit of water.
So a little trick, which has helped in my tempeh making too, and my bean koji. As soon as you drain the beans or the nixtamalized corn or whatever it is out of the pot, or rye berries or whatever, pour it out into a colander, let it sit there for a few minutes, and then put it on a sheet tray. Don't shock it in more water. Don't put it right into a cold environment like your fridge. And the residual steam coming off of it, most of that's on the surface of the bean or the grain or whatever it is. So you end up, when you do it this way, with very dry surfaces, but you'll still have good moisture inside the grain or the legume or whatever it is. So if you allow them to kind of cool down at room temperature and don't shock them, don't rinse them or that sort of thing, that's really, really helped. I was having so much trouble with tempeh and getting it dry enough, and then adding, vinegar back to it, and it being too wet and just not working well. When I started doing this and letting the steam dry off of it without shocking it or rinsing it or anything, my success went from 1 in 5 to 5 out of 5. So that's a little trick that we use at the restaurant all the time, and it works almost every time.
And so for the people who are watching this, I mean, what I would say is like, you know, I mean, all of us and you, I mean, anyone who's experimenting, you know, it's like, you know, first of all, you're going to have a certain number of failed batches, and, you know, you just have to like use your, you know, powers of observation and analysis to like figure out what the problem is and how you can improve your process. I mean, you know, the most basic processes are all laid out, but if you want to get experimental to some degree, like, you know, you got to figure it out as you go along, you know, based on the generic information that's available to you.
So you brought up failed batches. How about we do a quick round robin? If Sandor, you most memorable failure, because it happens.
Well, sure. I mean, you know, my most memorable failures were definitely when I was fermenting tofu, trying to make Mao tofu, moldy tofu, and I was trying to do it the way I was reading about it on straw, on pumpkin leaves, and you know, I kept on getting, you know, bright red, bright orange molds. And what I finally have been doing, I mean, a student of mine from Taiwan, Pao, if you're out there watching, thanks. But Pao, who lives in London and is from Taiwan, brought me some Mao tofu starter from Taiwan that I have, but that's not available if you don't speak Chinese. Like, it's not available in English on the internet. So in rereading Art of Fermentation, it just reminded me that one of the fungi that they find in those are rhizopus. So I've just been using tempeh starter to make Mao tofu, and it's just been working so well. So yeah, I mean, largely starters can be interchangeable. I mean, I know you guys have gotten into, you know, just all the different, you know, styles of you know, aspergillus starters that are available in Japan. You know, I really have only used the ones that are available through Gem Cultures, that Gem Cultures has been importing into the US. But I'm finding even with a pretty limited palette, I mean, it's very versatile.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I you know, and you say that. So I get virtually all my spores from Koichi Higuchi at Higuchi Matsuno Soken Shoten out of Osaka, and he has a strain of Aspergillus oryzae called Hashimoto that I personally feel rivals almost any rhizopus I've used to make tempeh with. The matting is so much denser and thicker. The flavor, I think, is just as complex. And that's, I haven't actually been using rhizopus for tempeh. I've been using this Hashimoto strain because it just, especially our production at the restaurant, and, you know, sometimes we do multiple cook, you know, techniques, and it's a busy line and that sort of thing. And the last thing you want is crumbly tempeh, you know, when you're trying to sear a steak of it or that sort of thing, or fry a piece of it. So, so yeah, you know, you can find all these different things. And I use rhizopus for booze all the time. You know, we even grow rhizopus in a Koji style on rice. You know, a lot of them are just interchangeable. So I think, Rich, how about a notable failure?
So a notable failure that actually ended up being beneficial was I got these really great organic soybeans. I got some experimental red rice from row 7. And I really wanted to make, you know, I really wanted to make a nice soy sauce. So then I did my best to toast the rice and kind of break it up and prepare the soybeans just right, but it was a little bit wet. So I put in my incubator, you know, let it go for, you know, the first 24 hours. It kind of got wet and a little bit weird. So I just said, well, let's just see how it goes. And then, the next after 12 hours, it actually got all stringy and sticky, and, you know, it became natto. So I had this level of, there's sort of a combination between what was the starter in there and whatever was naturally occurring that had sort of taken over due to the moisture. And I did a little bit of research, because one of the things that I was wondering is, like, I don't ever have something foreign come in here and and mess up the works. And my incubator was clean and everything. And I did some research, and if you do some research on basically Bacillus subtilis, is that it can survive really high heat. So,
oh yeah, it survives boiling.
Yeah.
So my assumption is that I didn't toast the rice high enough to kill off this natural bacteria that kind of encompassed it. But it was like not what I intended, but it was pretty awesome because I just made, natto without even using a starter culture. So it's pretty cool.
Heck yeah.
I mean, I actually, I had a few, I was trying for a little while to make big batches of tempeh, like 50 pounds of tempeh at a time in like a refrigerator incubator. But the problem with that is that midway through the process, after about 12 hours, it starts to generate heat.
Yeah.
And then I would walk in the morning, and as soon as I opened the door, I would know that it had turned into natto. So basically, if like it generated so much heat that it knocked out the rhizopus fungus, then the rhizopus was like holding the Bacillus subtilis at bay. It was producing some sort of a compound that was preventing it from growing. But as soon as it died from overheating, then the natto took over. And it turned into natto. And I've made batches of natto without a starter. Like you don't really need a starter to make natto. And I have one more show and tell item. So like one thing I'm very interested in is across West Africa, there are these like fermented condiments that are dominated by Bacillus subtilis. So these are African locust beans. Spontaneously fermented, so Bacillus subtilis, and then dried into this little cake, and then it would be powdered and used as a seasoning in stews and stuff. But Bacillus subtilis is everywhere. It's on. I mean, it's on everything.
Yeah,
it is
a story.
So many of my.
I have this tie-back story. If you remember the brunch that I made Koji for, it was the same brunch that I made Ogiri for that you presented fermented foods around the world. And I remember when Jeff asked me to make Ogiri, and I had so much trouble trying to research exactly the process because there's very little documentation on it. So I didn't really fully understand what an alkaline ferment was because I was this rookie on fermentation. I was like, oh, I made Koji, there are these instructions from Brandon Byers that I can just follow, and it came out great. And, the Ogiri starter that I used was, basically the style of Sierra Leone, which they use sesame seeds. So I boiled some sesame seeds, I rinsed them, and I wrapped them in a banana leaf, and I just let them hang out for a couple weeks. And you know what you do when you smell Koji, you stick your face in it and you take a big whiff. That's what I did with this stuff, and I was like, oh my god, this is the most horrible smelling thing. And that was sort of my experience with opposite sides of the spectrum of doing, I guess, what people would consider more advanced ferments than just adding salt to some vegetables. But so that I didn't go ahead and go through the rest of the process, which was smoking it and then salting it, and it became this really interesting, funky, super funky, umami product that that was pretty good, but it didn't entrance me as Koji products did. It's just on its different level. I have an appreciation for it, but it's just very different from anything I had ever tasted before.
So we have a question here about if there's strong feelings about types of Koji that are available for purchase. The person says they use a dried bag Koji that they ordered online. And most recently, they found a refrigerated plastic container at a local grocery store, which I'm guessing is Cold Mountain. Both the packages are in Japanese, so they're not sure what the differences are. I'll say early on, when I was a little unsure of growing koji and that sort of thing, and wasn't necessarily set up to do it, I did like source online from Japan, like freeze-dried packages or dried packages of already inoculated rice that had the koji grown on it. But personally, I very quickly outgrew that because I always needed more koji than I could get from those packages. And I quickly moved on to growing my own. Good night. I quickly moved on to growing my own and just really haven't looked back from there. So now I focus on like different types of spores and like different types of kojis, like we've been discussing. Rich and I consider Rhizopus, a koji. Monascus perpeus is a koji. Not strictly according to like a translated definition, but they're these microscopic filamentous molds that do wonderful things to make our food more delicious. So that's one of the things that I focus on right now. I'm not sure, Sandor, and when you were early on and sourcing pre-grown grains or those sort of things, did you have a favorite or one you went to more often?
I mean, at that time, I was really just getting it from a couple of miso companies. I got it from South River Miso Company, and I got it from
I thought you were crazy.
Was the American Miso Company that's now Miso Master. But I mean, really, like you're saying, I mean, it was just hard to get enough, or it became prohibitively expensive to get enough. And that was, that was part of my, what finally got me to, figure out an incubator system where, where I could make my own. And I mean, I have had fine results working with, dried koji, but I just feel like fresh koji is just so much more powerful, so much more enzyme rich. It's just like, it's like anything fresh, as opposed to, sort of anything, that's been dried. It's just more vibrant. So, I mean, I think if people are dying to like, play around with koji, I mean, nothing's wrong with buying some. And I certainly don't have a brand to recommend or warn you against. But, like if you want to really experience the magic of koji, to the full extent, like you got to have the aromatics of, the koji while it's growing. And, and then it's really, once you figure out making it, it's no harder to make like, 3 kilos or 5 kilos as it is to make a small amount. So,
well,
you can make a lot.
Yeah. And that being said, I mean, Rich, I don't remember the exact ratio off the top of my head, but a 40-gram packet of spores, which will run you from Gem Cultures with shipping, what, $35 roughly? Somewhere in there.
In that order. Yeah.
I mean, how many pounds or kilos of koji will that grow?
So
we're talking an ounce and a half of spore.
Yeah, for every gram you can grow one kilo. And we've even found that you can use less than that.
Yeah.
If you have your system really down and you understand your grains, and it's, for the most part, if it's polished rice, you can use a lot less. I mean, it's a matter of literally as you would season something with salt, it's even on the order of less than that.
Yeah.
Then you can grow. So, I mean, if you think of 400 kilos, which is like what is it, 880 pounds? So almost like half a ton.
Yeah.
For
a $35 purchase.
Yeah,
you gotta buy your rice and that sort of thing. But when you compare that $35 just for the spores to online, if you buy pre-grown or pre-inoculated grains or legumes, I mean, you could spend multitudes more than that $35 and have multitudes less miso or sake or whatever it is you're making.
Right.
Here's a good question. And you know, I apologize in advance for everyone because there's 61 open questions and 9 minutes. Would you say the quality and type of rice is a major factor influencing the quality and taste of rice, Koji? I mean, I would say absolutely. I mean, but I wouldn't say that there's like one kind of rice you have to use. I mean, I certainly have met people who, you know, sort of came out of a very specific tradition and said like, you have to do this process with this kind of rice. You know, I have more been like, just using whatever rice I had around. And yes, absolutely, there are qualitative differences in, you know, with different rices, but the fungus will grow on any kind of rice. If you want it to grow on brown rice in general, you got to scratch it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But like very lightly milled rice. But, you know, with that caveat, like, I mean, any kind of rice will work. You know, I mean, like Jeremy was saying, if you live in a region where they're growing rice, like use the local rice, use the local grains, you know, use the things that are freshest and most abundantly available. But absolutely, like different rices will give you different characteristics.
Yeah, and you know, oftentimes, I mean, in Koji Alchemy, Rich and I recommend bang for your buck. We like long grain jasmine. It's got the highest amount of amylose in it, which the Koji really loves as its primary food source. It's a beautiful rice, jasmine rice in itself, and its own aroma and its taste and its floral nuttiness. And it's typically, you know, can be found for a good price per pound. So that's kind of like my go-to, especially I go through anywhere from 100 to maybe 200 pounds of rice a month, depending on how much of different makes I'm making at the restaurant. So for me, you know, that bang for my buck goes a long way.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider is the actual shape of the rice. The fact that it's long grain, it has the infiltration level to the center it's much shorter, so it actually helps the Koji be able to eat more efficiently, and then you can actually pull it sooner than you would for other rice, and which also adds to the level of, you know, getting that sweetness. So I think one of the things with rice Koji, especially jasmine, is that if you're looking to make, you know, alcohol with it, it's a really good medium, because it, you know, you can convert it really quickly, and it actually starts to get sweet fairly quickly, just due to the fact that it infiltrates so quickly and it grows efficiently. So that's another consideration, is when you're growing Kojis, like, you know, what kind of penetration are you getting based on the grain size and the shape is something to think about.
All the time. And those are also, you know, optimizations that, you know, you can tinker with and explore and see what works best for you. I see a really great question here, because Rich and I come at this slightly different than you do, Sandor. And I know you're more in the camp of David Zilber and Rennie Redzepi, with like trying to harvest the spores from the wild potentially, or growing out your own generations. Whereas Rich and I, our big thing is, if you're gonna grow for pure spore, leave it to like these Koji producing spore professionals in Japan. You know, they have a regulated industry for a reason. So, you know, the question is it safe to use inoculated rice, grow the necessary mold, then dehydrate it and blend it, and with that powder, inoculate your next batch? I think the three of us in consensus can say yes. And then I think Rich and I lean more towards but. Rich, you want to kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it is that, especially when you're first beginning, you don't want to necessarily have things come along for the ride. And there are opportunities and points in time when you may not notice it, but something else comes along for the ride. And obviously, as you go through the process and things go awry, you will potentially, you have the opportunity to notice these issues. But there is like a very small, minute risk that something may go wrong. so we always encourage people when they're first starting and thinking about, growing koji in this fashion, is to do it in the most controlled way possible to be successful, because it's not as easy as, as Sandor says, to add salt to some vegetables and just let it hang out. It's something that you could be growing something that's potentially bad, without, prior knowledge of being able to do this in a way that you feel comfortable with or you have experience with. And I think that's the key to all of this, is just to build a level of knowledge where you lead to a specific comfort level, and you feel good about what you're making, the quality, and you feel okay about eating it. Because I think when a lot of people start, they have a perception of what mold is, and it's the perception that it's not good for you and it's bad and it shouldn't be part of food. But as most of us are, pretty much, pretty much all of us who are on this call right now who have tasted soy sauce and may not know that koji is the driver for soy sauce for some of you. But now you know that, and you realize that mold is a wonderful thing, and that it creates all of these wonderful, condiments and drinks that allowed us to, a lot of us to be here today, to have survived those times when it was tough and preservation was necessary.
And I kind of want to add one more thing into that before turning it over to you, Sandor, so you can talk about, how you've gotten off of corn husks and that sort of thing. One of the things that, as Rich and I became really close friends with Koichi Higuchi, him and his company, his family's company, they're one of 7 left in all of Japan that solely produces koji spores. And this is a family-owned company. Koichi is either 7th or 8th generation. The company's like 200 some years old. There's another company that I think is pushing 500 years old. And then the other 5 are somewhere a little lesser than Koichi's company in terms of time they've been around. And these are all family-run, relatively small companies. We're not talking about like massive conglomerates like ConAgra and Hormel, who are like controlling the food supply top down and influencing. These are people that are really, really driving the preservation of kojis worldwide. Because in their banks, in Koichi's vaults that they carry of all the species they've ever grown, they have hundreds of different variations that have been specialized for different uses, and there's different species and this sort of thing. So supporting them drives the preservation of this, and it really helps preserve a industry that's unique in Japan, but also in China and the Koreas and other places that use these molds. The Philippines, where they, some people do produce pure cultures. These are largely small family-driven enterprises, and they're working really hard to protect the biodiversity that's important for their individual cultural identities. And that's another reason that we really recommend, when you get spores, like get them from a producer, as opposed to trying to cultivate them in an area that may not be geographically identical in a lot of ways to the areas that kojis were domesticated in. Sandor, I'll let you take.
Yeah, sure. I think that probably we're in our last minute, but I totally agree. Especially for people who are learning how to do it, use starter cultures. Like, even if you have ambition to sort of do without starter cultures, start with starter cultures. It'll at least give you a strong sense of expectations and knowing what you're looking for. And I feel like, we're in this age where, the internet makes it easy to obtain these things, and that's great. Now, if suddenly like that fell apart, I would not discourage people from trying to make their own koji. But as long as we have as long as we have this access, but I think it's really just always good to remember that, like, until the 20th century, there were no pure culture starters, but that also meant you couldn't make anything anywhere. You had to make things in the places where, where they would happen. I appreciate caution. I think none of us want to be encouraging people to do things that are potentially dangerous or You know, using starter cultures is definitely a way to sort of keep it predictable. I visited a sake maker, Terada Honke, Masaru Terada, 34th generation sake maker. But, you know, they're just doing it via wild fermentation, but in a building that's been used that way for 350 years, which is not the same as just doing it in my kitchen or your kitchen. So, you know, I think we have to, like, you know, we have to respect that the traditional methods sometimes have been in traditional spaces. So, I mean, there's like 68 other questions. I'm really sorry to everyone that we, you know, weren't able to answer all of these questions. You know, clearly once you get a bunch of geeks like us geeking out, it can just go on and on.
Well, and, you know, if we can say, I know, you know, Rich and I are fairly accessible via, you know, different social media platforms. So if you had a really pressing question that we didn't get to, you know, reach out to us on Instagram, you know, that sort of thing. What are the other platforms? It may be a little bit before we get back to you, but we will eventually get there. You know, Sandor, are you still monitoring the forums on like wild fermentation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. I have my website. People email me questions. You know, sometimes I'm faster, sometimes I'm slower, but generally I get around to them eventually. There's this one question I'm dying to answer. I've been learning to make Indian cuisine. Is there anything you know of traditional Indian cuisine that is fermented? Yes. They even make like koji equivalents, marcha, faf in the north of Italy. Yogurt is fermented. Dosas are fermented. I participated in a 3-day webinar I was the only non-Indian person. It was all people in India talking about fermentation. So definitely there's a lot of Indian fermentation.
Indian, Pakistani, Nepalese, Tibetan, like all, like if you think there's a place in the world where fermentation doesn't feature at least fairly predominantly in the cuisine, you're mistaken, because we would not be here as a species if it weren't for these food preservation techniques. So keep that in mind. It has literally allowed us to survive.
Although is koji really a food preservation technique?
I mean, koji in itself.
Yeah. Or is it a food like
it's a
unlocking technique?
Yeah, right.
It's a catalyst.
That's it. So I'm holding this up really quick, so people can get hopefully a clear shot. I might have some glare.
So just to be clear about this book, I mean, it's wonderful. It's reflections about fermentation, but it's not practical how-to information. You're not going to like learn how to make koji. You're not going to learn how to make sauerkraut or yogurt. You know, this is like, there's beautiful microscopy of aspergillus and other organisms. That's our little, like, you know, fungus cover girl there. But you know, the text is really like reflecting on, you know, sort of bigger meanings of fermentation, how we talk about, you know, various kinds of cultural fermentation, and you know, how, you know, anything can be fermented, you know, our emotions, our ideas, you know, music, art, politics, like, you know, fermentation is much bigger than just the foods that we eat and the beverages we drink.
And it's so great. David Zilber, like, you know, chuckled at me when Rich and I talked to him a little bit ago, because I'm of this camp that, you know, I like to feel that these microorganisms, whether they're filamentous molds or they're bacteria, whatever they are, have some level of sentient intelligence that our brain, it's different from us. We just can't comprehend it. You know, I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove that. But I like to think that, you know, they've allowed us to evolve, and hopefully one day we'll unlock some of their secrets and continue to use them to repair some of the damage we've done, or all the damage we've done to the planet. So, you know, hopefully we'll be able to repay, you know, their sentient intelligence one day. But, so
okay, I like that. I like that.
I'm super jazzed about this new book, because, I mean, this is what I stay up at night thinking about. you know, whether like Acetobacter wants me to live or not. I'm still stoked, and I think a lot of people getting into fermentation, understanding maybe some of these ideas and philosophy around it will hopefully help put you at ease too with the practical application and act of fermenting and growing molds and using them to produce food.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for drawing some attention to my book, and thanks for bringing us all together. This has been a real treat, and it's exciting, you know, sort of seeing people so excited about your book and about Koji, and I feel like my social media feed is just full of people doing, you know, exciting experimentation in home kitchens and restaurant kitchens.
It's great.
I feel like the inspiration has gone full circle in terms of what you taught us through your books and sharing your knowledge, and us being able to bring you what we learned and discovered in this fashion. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
We will always call you Sensei.